Today, I thought I'd just jump in, record my own session. I've just come back off of finishing the Adidas Manchester Marathon in an absolutely dismal time, but it gave me a lot of time to think about the business and clinical trials. And there is surprisingly a lot of analogs that are always pulled out of high performance sport and business. This is all very just off the cuff and just as it comes to my mind. Hello, welcome, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. This is the Study Success Blueprint. Hello, my name is Matthew Mace. This is the Study Success Blueprint. You may notice that I'm alone today. I have just completed the Manchester Marathon, and I will come onto it a little bit later, but probably one of the worst days in the 15 or 16 marathon races that I've attempted and completed in the last decade. But I felt compelled to record today to really relay some of the thoughts that were going on in the course, and I was always trying to relay them back to what I do in a day-to-day business context. Now, for those who've been in business circles for a very long period of time, you'll know there's always this analog that's always drawn between elite athletes, mainly team sports, and high business performance. And so nothing is really new that I'm going to say about here, but I wanted to just to consider how this learnings can apply specifically in the clinical trials context. One of my first business interactions with clinical trials was when CardioMEMS was acquired by St. Jude Medical, and I ended up being put relatively in the foreground of that as we tried to commercialize the product in the United Kingdom and had to deal with the situation where the landmark clinical trial for this therapy had not included European patients in the trial. Therefore, the endorsement for the technology from the individual countries that we operated in was somewhat lacking. And when I was on the course, and what happened today was basically, for anyone who is in the United Kingdom, realized that we had a very unseasonably hot weekend. And in Manchester, I got told the sun never shines in Manchester. It topped out about 24, 25 degrees, and there was zero clouds, and the track temperature hit above 30 on the finish line. And there's a long-standing elite sport philosophy, and it persists mainly in solo sports, which is manage the knowns and prepare for the unknowns. So we think about when I was at St. Jude, we were trying to commercialize CardioMEMS in a clinical context, less so trials context, but a clinical context. We could manage the knowns, we could manage the data, we could manage what we have, the objections, the ability to try to get the product in market. But we had to prepare. We couldn't manage or directly affect, what had happened before and how the individual country reimbursement pathways would view the historical data. So bringing that round into the marathon analogy that we have here, we prepare ourselves, our clothing, our fueling, our drinking, our sleep strategy, our hydration strategy, everything is meticulously fine-tuned, and we have a training block of somewhere between 16 and 24 weeks, depending on whatever plan you're following. And in a clinical trials context, we have a training block before we go to first patient in, that training block is probably the same for a lower class device, not an active implantable, or it's, multiple years if we're talking about preclinical testing, or we're talking about getting through ethics, etc. And so as I'm plodding through the course and I'm thinking about what did I plan for, what didn't I plan for, I prepared for it to be hot. I planned the fueling strategy, there was enough time out, etc. But what I had to prepare for, the unknowns, was how steep the increase in temperature would be and how my body would react to that. And mile 7 out of 26, there was something that came over and I was, unable to continue at the pace that I had already set. And that happens in clinical trials all the time. We have no control of how an individual regulator, an individual ethics committee might view our trial. We have little to no control of the site's legal department and how they will react and what they may request in changing. And you know what? Legal breaks down and we get delays. We have to prepare in our training blocks that we will hit obstacles during the trial process, whether that's we can't find patients or, as we all quite often remember, not very long ago, we were, unable to leave our houses. So we, need to well prepare, and we need to anticipate what may come ahead, and we need to have a backup plan. And I'm very fortunate to have a phenomenal business coach who he always introduces the concept of a pre-mortem. So you examine your project and you understand every way that it might be scuppered and try to have a plan, if you can't mitigate, what you will do when those problems arrive. So I won't labor that too much, but the concept of preparing things that are in your control and preparing for the unknowns is extremely important, not just in a clinical trials context, but in a wider business context. When we go through similar training block, all of those activities that we do to try to figure out about how we're going to roll out this trial and how we prepare ourselves for that going forward. The second concept was the backup plan, if you like, was to make sure that today I had a plan. I knew what the mission was and how I might achieve that. Now, what's interesting when you do a solo sport like running, you very quickly realize that the goals that you set yourselves, some of them are achievable and some of them are not achievable. And so setting yourself out with a goal of achieving a certain pace or a certain time is to some extent farcical because, like we were just saying before, you have prepared well, you've tried to control everything, but on race day, something may change. So if you're wedded to a certain pace and a certain speed, then that's not going to be achievable. That's not a controllable metric for you in race day. So what happened today, well, the one thing I've learned over 15, 16 marathons is that the metric I can control or I can hang my hat on is, well, first of all, not stopping is the right thing and always making sure you have forward momentum. And the second is to achieve a set number of steps per minute. And that's an input which I can control, and something that also there is adaptability in that it is linked to pace, it is linked to speed, but there are other variables that I can control to make sure I still hit, my standard and go forward. And I was reminded whilst adjusting my course about the first ever trial I was privileged to be part of, which is actually whilst I was still working at the NHS, and it was a CRT trial. And we were told very explicitly at the beginning of the trial by our cardiologist that the metric we measured ourselves on was not recruitment. And actually, if any clinical trialist is listening today, is like going, what? Recruitment is everything. Well, recruitment is everything. But there are a lot of other factors that go into that. So one of the key things we did and I learned in that process was actually to focus on the controllable metric that we could set ourselves, that we could adjust and increase and decrease and push whenever we needed. And what we were focused on was the number of screened patients. And that was something a lot more in our control. And for anyone who has been in the business circle for the last decade or so is very familiar with the 20-mile march. And a brief recap, which is the battle between Ormondson and Scott as they planned their march towards the South Pole, and the concept of what was very much in the forefront of a winning team, Ormondson and his group, and not so much in Scott's camp. So specifically, there is a 1-to-1 matching when it comes to a marathon. We have to march at a set cadence to make sure we hit our number. And when the days are tough, the walk is tough. When days are easy, the walk is easy. We still hit that same standard that we met. So if I think about the CRT trial we were part of, we set our goal to find one patient and screen 5 every 2 weeks. So some days, some weeks, it was tough and we had to push and we had to find and we had to delve and we had to dig one patient, but it was in our control. And other weeks, it was great. Patients fell in our lap. We could just take a little bit of an easier ride that next week because we knew we might face difficulty again. The takeaway is to set a standard, and set that standard is something that you can control. And then socialize that standard, socialize your goal and how you're going to achieve it, rather than leaving things to assumption. Say, oh, I thought you would have, is when you know there has been a communication breakdown, when you know we're definitely on the wrong path. So I learned very, very early on that the focus on the screened patient versus the recruited patient was the metric that we would adhere to in our first trial, but also something I would take away with me as I moved on to different trials with different technologies. Tying those two together, just so we're on the same page, we have knowing what you can control, making sure we have a pre-mortem so we know what we're going to action to adversity. And then whatever we do, we set a standard, and the standard has to be entrenched inside something that is controllable. And I'm talking about patients, but it may not be a patient trial that you're performing. It may be a data analytics trial, and entrenching the notion of what we're going to achieve on a set day, week, month basis, and picking a metric for us to track that is a leading metric, is something that is in our control that will reach to the end goal is important. And the final thing that was abundantly clear to me today, which I was most compelled to share with you, is that it's all about the mentality we take into adversity and how we react to positive and negative experiences along the journey. Now, for those who have been involved in clinical trials, you know it is a roller coaster. It's an absolute up and down of emotion. And it's made worse if we don't focus on the two prior concepts, which is really just having good communication. We're on the same page. But when things go wrong, we need to have strategies that make sure we keep our emotion in check. Really specifically today, I was barely at mile 8, so not even an hour into the race, and something wasn't right. I couldn't continue at the speed I was going. Today was the utter worst time I've ever posted for 26.2 miles by a significant margin. But the training I've had and the knowledge I've had and accumulated, and I'll specifically point to a book. If you haven't read it, it's phenomenal, written by a neuroscientist, Professor Stephen Peters, The Chimp Paradox, talks about, I'm paraphrasing, the slow and fast pathways that exist in our brain, and categorizes the fast pathway as the chimp, and the immediate knee-jerk reaction to what happens when things are good and when things are bad. Running on the race course today, needing to slow down, realizing my time was slipping away, wanting to get sub 3:30 again. You have a choice. We have a choice of succumbing to the chimp side of our brain and saying, "Oh, that's it, it's over, I'm a failure," etc. Or we engage the slow, rational side of our brain. Say, "Oh, okay, I already have a strategy how to deal with the disappointment. I've seen off my chimp. I've set my rules." Like what? I told myself I can't get upset about time. It's a rule. Can't break that rule. The good thing about chimps is they listen to rules. So that's giving enough time to engage the slow part of the brain. Is like, great, okay, fall back to the plan. We keep our standard. We push. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. We're going to meet our standard of the steps per minute in my case. It's happened in every single clinical trial I've been a part of because it's natural. You know, majority of the time it's because we're behind that we engage the less rational side of our brain, and we anger and frustration boils over within the sponsor team or within the clinical research team. But if we have clear communication, we have a clear standard that we meet, whereas in my case, my mental blocker is to stop the chimp. We don't fixate on patient enrolled. Now that is crazy to people listening. But because my analytical brain, I want it to take over, is saying, okay, we're going to not get angry, not get upset. We're going to control our emotion here. And are we still hitting the standard? That level of communication and that level of consistency is hugely appreciated amongst the collaborators and our own team. I don't know the specifics of your trial and what it is, but if we make sure we use our training block, back to the analogy here, that we communicate what the standard is, and that standard is achievable, it is in our control, and we head off before we get there of we're not going to get angry. We're not going to get upset. We're not going to lose our head and lose the sight on a goal because of things that are not in our control. How do we make sure we have an eye in on the end goal? In my case today, the finish line. I'm 20 miles or so away from the finish line going, oh man, there is no way I'm going to complete this. But stopped, take a breath, get clarity in the situation. And the best thing you can do if you're a leader of a team, whether that's a research team or a sponsor team or a CRO team, the best thing you can do is to offer clarity of the goal to your team. And the best time to offer clarity is before we even start. Because if we're scrambling, we have engaged the fast, irrational side of our brain. If we do everything together right, we will reach our goal. You will reach the end of the trial. Trials often do not complete when there is a change of course in the middle. We've had very meticulous planning. We missed an unforeseen circumstance, but that's fine. The circumstances, that's what happens. But we will reach the end. We'll continue to push against the metric that we know is controllable. And by offering clarity, setting ourselves clear boundaries and clear lines of communication, we're able to avoid any pain or upset about not hitting some arbitrary target because we know that the underlying clinical trials business is sound and we will hit our target. Doing human clinical studies is a long-term endeavor, and we have to be able to maintain our energy level throughout that, which is meaning the highs can't be too high and the lows can't be too low. And the only way to do that is to set our rules, how we're reacting. I'm not saying don't celebrate, absolutely celebrate good wins, but don't roll into despair when something doesn't go your way for 1 week or 2 weeks. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's interesting. It was at least interesting to me, and it was a good way to kill 3 hours thinking about the translation of what I was feeling on the ridiculously hard course and what it was that we could do and learn. So it is first and foremost planning to control what we know is controllable and preparing ourselves for the unknown, that we have a plan, and that we secondly have a metric that we know we will track, that is meaningful, that ensures we operate with a clear understanding of performance. And that metric is fully in our control. And the last thing is really neither of those two items work if we're not able to control our emotion. And controlling our emotion is not something we want to figure out on the course. is not something we want to figure out 10 or 20 months into the trial preparation and launch. We want to know that beforehand. We want to know how we react to not just adversity, but also how we react to positivity, and making sure that we stay level headed, we communicate effectively, and we always make sure we're able to keep the high performing, rational side of our brains leading the ship and making sure we keep an eye on our goals. And with that, I'll leave you here. If you like this, please like and subscribe to this wherever you like to listen to podcasts. We'll be back with our regular service with an interview with Adam Walker, who is a clinical trials expert for 3 decades, sharing his experience of data management, as well as practical tips of how we might look forward to a new future in the clinical trials landscape. Thanks for listening. So with that, I can leave you today. Speak to you very soon. I've been Matthew Mace, and this is the Study Success Blueprint. Do I continue at the same pace when I know it will definitely have a negative outcome? Or do I switch to an alternative strategy? But the point is that the alternative strategy of taking a slightly different pace and different fueling and different hydration strategy still had the same effect. You finish the marathon, you put one foot in front of the other, you perform, in my case, 160 steps per minute, and you sustain energy.